18 грудня працює медіа-центр.
December the 18th, this is Ukrinform. I'm Svetlana Chiparenko. Let's talk about the topic of persecution and humiliation, the reality of being a lawyer in the occupied Crimea. Our participants are Daria Svyrydova, Ukraine SAM coalition expert, law firm AZONES partner. Roman Martynovskyy, lawyer who left Crimea after the beginning of occupation, lead expert at Regional Center for Human Rights. Vitaliy, Secretar, first deputy head of the Prosecutor's Office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. And Illya, Kostin, lawyer, head of the Department of Military Justice, the member of the Ukrainian Bar Association. So, Daria, let's start with the report that has been prepared on the status of following on the rights of the attorneys in Crimea. Yeah, thank you so much. I will start with a general context. From the beginning of the occupation of Crimea in 2014, and the territory has been annexed within 1 month, covered it with its law, created illegal courts of law, offices of prosecution, and Bar Association, which was quite loyal and under full control of the Russian Federation, and all the Ukrainian lawyers should have joined if they wanted to keep practicing at the territory of Crimea, practicing law. At the time of the occupation, according to human rights associations and the regional human rights branch, there were 1,700 Ukrainian lawyers present, of which currently there are about 800 left, plus about 100 attorneys came to Crimea from the territory of the Russian Federation, but most of the practicing lawyers there are the Ukrainian lawyers. So, should we treat them as collaborators? Is it safe to claim that they are adhering to standards, or politically motivated cases in Crimea? Are they prevalent? What risks they involve for the attorney? What Ukraine could do in this regard? So the answers to all those questions we tried to provide in our report. The 5th AM teamwork effort plus Silly located in Prague, Czech Republic. This report sheds light on the work of the attorneys, which in the time of war is invisible but becomes so much more dangerous. And the facts of persecution of attorneys in the under occupation have happened not only recently, but from the very beginning, especially those attorneys that were defending pro-Ukrainian Tatar political prisoners. They've been persecuted by the Russian occupation authorities. And this was documented not only by Ukrainian human rights authorities, but by the General Assembly of the UN, etc. Those facts have been documented, they've been made known, but the persecution became so much more acute and critical, and that's what the report shows, at the beginning of the full-fledged invasion. And the context is this: most of the politically motivated cases have been added, thus much more Ukrainian citizens required legal aid, especially avoiding mobilization into the aggressor's armed forces, or cases of so-called discreditation of the army of the aggressor. Dozens of such cases, and all of those clients had to be defended. And finally, full isolation of Crimea after the annexation, information isolation, no access of, for human rights missions or journalists, something which was at least partially possible before the full-fledged invasion. So those attorneys, what sort of persecution and pressure they feel? Systemic lack of access to their clients, systemic apprehensions, arrests, administrative arrests for 10, 15 days, persecution as part of administrative and criminal cases, launching full-fledged discreditation campaigns through controlled media, apprehension, and use them as witnesses in the cases of their own clients. Systemic fines and penalties imposed for publication in their mass media accounts, information that the Russian Federation claims to be banned or extremist, so and many more other forms and shapes of persecution. This, of course, cools down all of the attorneys practicing under the occupation, who even think twice whether they would start defending our citizens who are being persecuted and prosecuted for political reasons. Other new set of risks come from the fact that all those attorneys under occupation has to cooperate with illegally established courts of law, cooperate with so-called law enforcement agencies, and so how this collaboration will be assessed by the state of Ukraine. This is the zone of fears for the attorneys under occupation, and there is no position of the Ukrainian Bar Association how to treat those attorneys, and also notorious initiatives in our parliament. The registered bill that suggests to criminalize the attorneys' activities at occupied territories, but this contradicts the consensus of the population. The recent polls suggest that the general consensus is such a job should not be criminalized. And secondly, it would affect the ability to defend our citizens from persecution in Crimea. And another element of uncertainty contributes to this cooling down effect that the attorneys at the occupied territories felt. The report states that, and my personal opinion is, the fact that they work and practice there, they should not be persecuted, it should not be criminalized. They should be allowed to practice after the occupation of those territories. But another thing is the attorney keeps practicing but cooperates with FSB, thus harming or violating rights of the clients, or affecting the national security interests of Ukraine, or collaborating in committing war crimes at the territory. Such facts have been stated in our report. For instance, well-known case of Radio Svoboda journalist Vladislava Sepenko, arrested there for quite a while. No independent attorneys were allowed there, and Violetta Seneglazova was assigned as a pro bono attorney by FSB, and she was forcing him to start cooperating. She was covering up the effects of torture of this activist. Another issue well known of Narinam Jalyamov, the first deputy, and brother Zakhtemov, when one of the brothers who've been persecuted for political reasons, they've been arrested and deported for politically motivated allegations. So one of those Zakhtemov brothers was defended by the attorney Oleg Lushko, who also covered the facts of the tortures of his clients until independent attorneys gained access finally. So he was also assigned and prevented independent attorneys to get involved. Moreover, when Akhtamov has had independent attorneys, he would come to those court hearings and would give evidence against the former clients. So these cases should be documented. They should also be properly evaluated by the bar association, by the self-governance associations. But in all those 10 years of occupation, only once the bar reacted a month ago based on the request of the human rights activists. The Kiev regional bar debarred Yulia Marchuk from Sevastopol, who heads the illegally created bar association in Sevastopol, involved in colonization of the Ukrainian peninsula by Russian Federation and persecution of other attorneys. So not blaming them would be tough for future illustration processes. We need to document all those cases, because after the occupation, when Ukraine relaunches the bar there, those people will just get, unfortunately, seep into the bar and discredit the whole bar in the eyes of the local population. So this is something that our report states. What could be done about this? The report suggests the mechanisms of what could be done now to counter such persecutions. The key, of course, is occupying Crimea. It's quite clear that until it's occupied, the whole work could be delegitimized. So the government could introduce national or international sanctions against people involved in persecution and intrusion into the professional affairs of the Ukrainian attorneys in Crimea. One of the Russian Federal Chamber members, who was the leader of so-called integration of the Russian attorneys into the illegal bar association in Crimea, Mr. Sharov, so-called, who ignored the fact that the attorneys are being persecuted and prosecuted. So he is still stated in the Ukrainian resources as a person who is at the risk of sanctions being applied, but none were applied so far. Another bar association of Ukraine think that it could monitor those facts in a systemic manner and start the procedure for launching disciplinary actions against those attorneys who violate the rights of the Ukrainian citizens in the occupied Crimea, and formulate the position about how those who still practice in the occupied Crimea, how they will be treated. So the special rapporteur of the UN on the independence of lawyers and attorneys should be invited to Ukraine to have a fresh look at the situation with the persecution of attorneys in the times of the occupation. We sent our report to her, but it's the government that has the mandate to request such a person to Ukraine or raise it at the parliament level, who are coming up with a convention of protecting the rights of the attorneys of the member countries of the Council of Europe. So in the time of war conflicts, this aspect of this risk, this threat should be taken into consideration at the level of the Council of Europe. And the final thing I want to sign off on is that, of course, all of those territories will be deoccupied sooner or later, and we will have to, among other things, reintroduce the bar, reintroduce the local self-governance bodies of the attorneys. So those issues should start to be resolved now, before the occupation. And this issue, among others, unfortunately, the National Bar Association of Ukraine, at least publicly, we don't know whether they came up with such a plan. But for instance, upon the request of the representative office of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, comes up with the first priority steps after the occupation, and among other things, myself and Illya Kostin, another speaker here, are involved into the task force that comes up with a vision of how the bar would be relaunched in the occupied Crimea. One of the visions, hopefully soon enough it will be presented, but that's one of the visions. Of course, it goes without saying that this policy of reintegration and relaunching of the bar should involve the bar self-governance authorities, including the relicants and those who still try to operate and practice in the time of occupation, which is extremely important to take their position into consideration. They understand better than others what sort of conditions they operate under. So hopefully this will be done. And these are tasks for tomorrow, next day. Because after the occupation, we learn how many legal challenges people will be facing, and without proper legal aid, we will not be even ensure the fair court hearing even. Thank you, Mr. Vitaliy. So what the Office of the Prosecutor's Office is doing in documenting such crimes committed against Ukrainian lawyers by the invaders? Yeah, we started documenting such facts since the time of occupation, and this all goes hand in hand with their professional activities. As soon as the attorney becomes a public person, especially when he or she defends the clients in politically motivated cases, for instance, blaming in creation of Hizb ut-Tahrir, more than 100 persons have been persecuted as the members of this terrorist organization, or the political prisoners cases, which requires from the attorney to be proactive participants of the process to make it visible, so that it will be known not only in so-called courts of law in Crimea, but also so that this issue should be discussed outside of Crimean Peninsula and mainland Ukraine, worldwide, because attorney is always a public figure, and probably he or she is the first source from his or her public statements. We learn about the violations that were happening in this or that process. And the Russian Federation still follows its own principles. Only when we started actively working in protecting the civilian population at the territory of Crimea, immediately the prosecution started, presented in different shapes and forms. For instance, the most frequent are facts when the attorneys are being persecuted for publications in social media. The publications made way before the occupation, 2013, for instance, situation with Emil Kurbadinov when he posted in where we discussed the Hizb ut-Tahrir issue, and taking into consideration the proactive position of this attorney on his way from one court hearing to another. He was apprehended in the city of Bakhchisarai. The searches were conducted at his office, at his domicile, and he got 10-day administrative arrests and spent in remand prison. These facts are quite illustrative. And Adam Simidlev's case is another illustrative one. The person who was defending his clients in his Hizb ut-Tahrir case and coming to the court hearing, so-called extremist counteraction center that exists in Crimea, this attorney has been apprehended. He was forced to get naked in front of the officer so that he would check certain facts. Of course, the attorney refused to, and for that, he gets an administrative penalty, namely being under arrest. These are not separate events. For instance, such absurd cases when some attorneys went to defend their colleague in the administrative case of arrest, and as soon as they would arrive in a group to the colleague, then they would be apprehended for participating in so-called mass event, which suggests only one thing. This is not a standalone case, no. This is a direct way of persecuting those persons. And the final stage that is happening in Crimea is debarring those people who are proactively defending the civilians and trying to find so-called discreditation publications, those that allegedly discredit Russian armed forces. Well, October this year, Alexei Ladin, a human rights activist, have been persecuted for allegedly disseminating the information that Russia doesn't like to be disseminated in respect of its so-called statehood. Lots of cases like this. We can talk about attorneys, about human rights activists, when the wives start defending their men who are getting imprisonment charges for 18, 20 years. But the Russian Federation, by applying the administrative sanctions against them, suggest you'd better not do this. And in the interview that Daria Svyrydova gave to Crimean, she clearly stated that she treats this as the pressure and the potential for further criminal persecution, not being done with just administrative pressure. So, since there is no access to the territory, we cannot defend them properly. First of all, because the attorneys themselves and the human rights attorneys recognize that the contact with the law enforcement agencies could have grave consequences for them. And thus, when we look at the civilian victims, when their relatives managed to visit the mainland Ukraine, and that's when we will get huge amount of data and evidence, and the victims themselves would make statements. But here they don't want us to make any investigative actions whatsoever. But of course, we document all those facts, and we recognize these are not just ordinary crimes like illegal searches, apprehensions. No, this is the crime of persecution that's and thus in May 2022, we sent informational notice to the Office of Prosecutor General, where we stated the facts of persecution of Crimean Tatars, and the huge number among of those attorneys by their nationality are Crimean Tatars, and we stated the facts of persecution of attorneys at the territory of Crimea, which of course impacts and affects their ability to defend their clients in Crimean political processes. We also cooperate with our human rights ombudsman. You probably heard the case Ukraine against Russian Federation on Crimea, and all the facts that we document on administrative case law of the Russian Federation. Of course, we provide our representative with so to properly defend the position of Ukraine. Currently, the preliminary hearings are over on this case, and hopefully the information that we transfer will provide additional arguments and evidence in the European Human Court's right. Of course, we've been grilled about the status of the Crimean Tatars. The last report that we stated was 2 weeks ago, when we stated what happens with the attorneys and the issue of annual rounds happening in Brussels or online, depending on the situation in Ukraine and worldwide, where we inform our European partners. And next meeting happens early next year, right after the report is published by the coalition. We plan to discuss this issue and initiate the application of sanctions against those persons who are persecuting human rights activists in Crimea. And what other arguments for the need or the absence of full information and the contact with the attorney and the need to document this? Reintegration processes. We clearly recognize that in a while, when Ukraine will reinstate its sovereignty in the territory of Crimea, we will have to discuss what will be the future of those who were persecuted in by Russians. The key issue would be annulling those cases, because there would be lots of administrative cases that will be then evolving into criminal cases if our people don't cave in. So then we will have to let them go and free them from the prisons, and that will be one of the elements of the reintegration process. So on behalf of the Office of Prosecution, we try on behalf of the government to document this at the national level, but also the international and political bodies should also react to those facts. And thank you. Mr. Roman, you are the attorney who left Crimea after the occupation. So share your story and tell us how the relocated attorneys live and how they help the Ukrainians in the time of war. Thank you. It's true. From the beginning of the occupation of the city of Sevastopol, I left that territory and I continue practicing at the in the capital of Free Ukraine, the city of Kyiv. I remember back in April 2014, in the city of Odessa, we had the session of the National Bar Association when the Crimean Peninsula and the city of Sevastopol were already occupied, and it was difficult to bring all of the deputies there, but the attorneys' wrists, they came to the city of Odessa late April 2014, so that for you to understand what was the attitude of the then chief officials. The first day was spent whether to let the attorneys from the city of Sevastopol and Crimea or not as members to this session. And when around 7-8 p.m. we understood that we're dragging our feet, most of the attorneys from Crimea had to just leave the hall. And that was the decision, not allowing us to participate full-fledged in this meeting of attorneys. And starting from 2014, actually, the attorneys from the Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol are deprived the ability to get involved in the performance of the self-governance bodies, both those that were established in Crimean. Let me remind you that at the time of the occupation, we had 2 qualification disciplinary commissions in Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol, also 2 councils. We conducted respective sessions and had the revision commissions in place. By the way, their performance, which has been discontinued, but legally it hasn't been discontinued, the work of those commissions. So until now, we don't know what happened with the amounts of membership fees collected for 2014. And let me remind you that it should have been done by the 31st of August 2014, couple of million for both territory jurisdictions. Nobody has reported just yet what happened with the funds. no information from the National Bar Association has been received by us. So, starting from 2014, let me reiterate the attorneys of the peninsula are deprived the right to get involved in the work of the bar, Supreme Disciplinary Commission, etc. Those attorneys who, from the beginning of the occupation, decided to move to the Free Territory of Ukraine, they faced huge number of ungrounded challenges artificially created. Firstly, they were forced to get re-registered in other regions and got disseminated. Well, there is no community left of those who were then registered in other cities of Ukraine. They would become local attorneys and they would no longer be qualified as Crimean attorneys. And this, I would tell you later, impacts reintegration and relaunching of the bar association's performance at the deoccupied territory of Crimea later on. So, de jure it has not been stopped, but has not been relaunched as well. Once again, for your understanding, the attorney has the right to have for the assistant and secretary and offer internship for those who want to get the status of attorneys. So all of the Crimean attorneys, both in mainland and in Crimea, have no such right. Why? Because the National Bar Association still hasn't introduced respective changes to those regulations that should be changed, like the assistant of attorney procedure still contains such norms that make it impossible for Sevastopol and Crimean attorneys to hire an assistant. This application should be filed to at the place of residence. If it's still city of Sevastopol, well, I'm probably the only attorney who hasn't changed the place of employment, but since officially it's in Sevastopol, I cannot hire neither the secretary nor the assistants. Similar rules could be found in the procedure on internship. Another issue that disallows us for those who would like to be an assistant and get such a status. So the decision was taken that those who want to get this status should file the application about the health status. How can a person staying in Crimea get such a health notice coming to mainland Ukraine and get it? Well, it's unreal to travel half across the Europe just to get this particular document. So actually, the person who wants to get the status of the attorney but lives in Crimea has no ability to get the status through internship. Why? Because they cannot be hired as interns at the occupied territory of Ukraine. Purely legal issues governed by the Bar Association's decision. Practicing law should be done in compliance with laws of Ukraine, but in Crimea, there are no courts of law. They only operate under the Russian, which is illegal, legislation. There are other issues that slow down the ability for the attorneys to hire interns, secretaries, or assistants. An unfortunate thing is that despite the fact that this goes on for almost 10 years now, and speaking quite recently on December the 15th, 16th in Uzhgorod, we had this annual meeting of the Council of Attorneys of Ukraine, and Ms. Yazitova, among of the challenges, stated that there is only one challenge joined for Crimean attorneys, and that those from other non-occupied territories. That's prosecution for being collaborants. No other problems stated by Mrs. Zvitova, unfortunately. Well, that does not help to maintain proper relations with Crimean attorneys. And so we lose this sense of unity in our community. And because of this attitude of the Bar Association officials, we will have nobody to reintegrate after the occupation of this peninsula. As for relaunching, well, it's being mentioned already, but we calculated the number of such attorneys that we will need immediately after the occupation is about 200,000 persons. Why? Because the burden will increase on criminal justice system because of the huge number of criminal cases associated with war crimes, crimes against territorial unity and safety of Ukraine, the involvement of attorneys in the process of getting rid of colonizers. Then reinstating the violating titles and asset rights. So the burden would be tremendous, and the number of attorneys would be greater than at the time of the occupation of Crimea. Now, as to our recommendations, let me reiterate once again, we believe that in 10 years' time, the parliaments, or at least one of the line committees, could have met once and discuss the status of the bar at the occupied Crimea. Also, we believe that the European community should pay attention to how the Ukrainian Bar Association helps or helps not to protect our rights. Also, we believe it will be great to create a separate committee within the bar on monitoring and coming up with the recommendations on the standards of protecting rights, professional status, and freedoms of Ukrainian attorneys. This war experience should be preserved and shared with the Europeans. Illya and Roman talked about lots of problems that the relocated attorneys from Crimea face, so how to help them to reintegrate and to preserve their identity in Ukraine. Thank you. Before the war, I was an attorney. I was born in Crimea, started my practice in Crimea as an attorney. So all those issues are close to my heart. And what I would like to state straight away that yet another keynote speaker mentions what a dire situation is within the Ukrainian Bar Association. For the society, this is a separate body that lives with its own life. And people think, well, it has nothing to do with them. No, it does have a lot to do with UI. Roman just stated how would the occupation be happening, namely that the number of the attorneys should be even more than they have now, or when it was the time of occupation, and we would not have that many attorneys. Reason being the not intransparent or absent rules altogether that the bar should have introduced the position in respect to the traitors, collaborators, those who just work in good faith, and those who fight there. In 10 years' time, this has not been done. And it could be done so simply that not a single response that I got from Mrs. Svyrydova bears any criticism. And truth be told, I started the survey that then I shared in the articles at Censornet from 2016. This survey started from the attorneys who pledged allegiance to LDNR and who are still attorneys in Ukraine. Similar happened in Crimea. So, in respect of Crimea, there's more higher level of treachery there. I researched from 2016 when Crimean attorneys were requested to address their issues into the Crimean Bar Association. That's 2016. I have these documents present on payment. Membership fees, again, unclear. Even now it says the address Karl Marx or something. Physically in the occupied Crimea. Why not represent the interests of all of the attorneys? I believe it was done consciously to make it more difficult to reintegrate those attorneys. So I can be quite vocal about this because I surveyed it from 2016. Not only researched it, but I filed complaints on the actions of collaborators and traitors who are not only cooperating and collaborating with the enemy, but are even investigators of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of DNR and LNR. The only debarring case was not initiated by the chief executives of the bar. No, the complaint was filed by NGOs. One case in all those 10 years. Not a single notification or definition of who is the traitor in the Crimean bar, who is not the traitor in the Crimean bar. Not a single case against the obvious traitors have been initiated by the bar. Why? So we need to clearly state the position of the Bar Association as its priority. Was it by accident that it hasn't been done? No, not by accident. The bar currently, could complain against me for all those articles. They complained against Mr. Roman, so they can initiate complaints or cases against traitors, but for some reason they don't do that, and it's not by accident. It's quite obvious that both Svyrydova and Mr. Kolesnik, They are people with pro-Russian position. Kolesnik is the partner to Rybin. Their law firm represented the interests of some of the separatists, of Medvedchuk, of Shari. You all know that guy. So this whole situation results in the fact that the colleagues and friends who are still stay there, they have no clue about the rules of the game, and it could be done. Two options. First, changing the leadership of the bar association, because it's going to be impossible with the current guys in charge, and provide explanation what would be considered to be the violation of the attorney's ethics and what not. And legislative efforts. We've been working on this. Illustration of collaborators would come handy quite soon. This could be done. And finally, I wanted to give the example of one government institution that did it all already. The bar is the only institution that hasn't done anything in respect to its people that traited Ukraine. The only institution. The Ministry of Justice could found the mechanisms to annul their licenses. For us, they claim, well, the procedure that they pass could not be carried out because we cannot properly notify a person. Well, let me quote now what the Supreme Court ruled. The case of notary officers in Crimea that addressed the Ministry of Justice to annul the decision of the Ministry of Justice to deprive them of the right to be the notaries of the Ukraine. So the ruling said, so anything that the leadership of the bar association state is not true, because the Supreme Court has stated its position, and the actions of the leadership could be equal to collaborators' activity. Olga Matarikin from Ukraine Forum. Question to Vitaliy, Daria. Ballpark. How many attorneys are there in Crimea now, and how many of them are collaborators? Well, let me start by stating that my personal position is that the attorneys in Crimea are not collaborators, and the fact that they continue practicing law in Crimea should not be the grounds of persecuting them for so-called collaborators' activities. Like I stated before, we should expect some individual approach. Some attorneys, by cooperating with FSB or otherwise, they harm the interests of their clients, violating the ethics and the laws, or commit crimes against national security, or commit war crimes. The fact that the illegally established Crimean Bar Association allows the Russian attorneys to come and practice in Crimea. This is the crime of colonization of Crimea, and this should be properly qualified in the laws of Ukraine. But my personal position is that they are not collaborators. They just continue their work, keep practicing law under the conditions that they found themselves in, the conditions of occupation. And their job has not been criminalized. To the total number of attorneys, Roman probably would learn more what is the exact number. We have 1 minute left. When we did the head counts this spring, almost 1,000 practicing attorneys in Crimea. About 800 of them are the attorneys who still have the status of the attorney of Ukraine. Thank you, guests. We have been discussing the issue of persecution and humiliation of Ukrainian attorneys in the occupied Crimea. And in 10 minutes' time, we discuss Telegram. Stay with us.
Дякую вам.